Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of Illustration Masterclass. Today we're going to be looking at the artist James Jean. Real quick, I want to make an announcement that I have a podcast coming up this Friday with an indie game dev artist. She wouldn't really consider herself to be an artist, but I consider her to be an artist because her game looks awesome. She spent 3 years working on this game, and so that will be going up on Friday. And I just wanted to encourage some people to check out some of the podcasts I have on here. I interview a lot of independent creative people. And so if you're looking for that inspiration, that inspirational story that makes you want to get up and create something, then I highly recommend checking out my podcast. And you can hit the notification bell for my videos if you want to be notified when that podcast goes up with Rebecca, and I'll be making a community post about it as well. So anyway, yeah, I just wanted to let people know that I am doing podcasts every week with different creative people, whether they're illustrators and comic artists, which is what it is that I'm doing, but also independent game developers and different people that are doing different creative things. The purpose of this channel is to like inspire. That's what it is that I want to do with this. So with that said, let's go ahead and let's jump into this. And so this is James Jean's work, and I'm a huge fan of James Jean just because his stuff is so out there. It's so unique. It's so different than what everybody else is doing on the illustration fine art landscape. You know, he's not trying to do like this super rendered style. He's doing much more of like this cartoonish style, but then he has these different contrasting elements in the piece. So let's see a couple of things it is that we can potentially learn from looking at this piece. For one thing, there is a strong use of like these vibrant colors, and I love the fact the way it is that he's able to achieve this is interesting, because one of the things I noticed looking at this is that he uses different colors of lines for different elements of his painting. This foreground element here is using a blue line, whereas this element is using an orange line. This is using a pink line, a blue line, which is really interesting. And then we look at the figure, and it looks like it's much more of a darker line, and this is much more of like a rendered style that we have here. Whereas the rest of the image feels very cartoonish. I think that's an interesting way of doing something that I hadn't really considered before in my illustration work, is using different colored lines, you know, to organize foreground and background shapes. I think that's really cool. So there's a lot of use of different colors going on here, and I think that creates a pretty I think that accounts for a pretty interesting dynamic image. I think it gives a hint of color that is not obvious at first. But you can imagine if these were all dark lines, then it would definitely change the vibe of the drawing, especially this down here, right? But his paintings, his illustrations, or I guess yeah, he's just a fine artist, but he's done illustration work in the past. His stuff is very abstract, and I think I might do a tutorial on like creating ideas like this. But this video series is mostly on the technique and the different things it is that I notice about the technique. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this into a grayscale, and let's take a look at it from grayscale. So if we take the color out of the image, for one thing, the image still works, right? Like he's organized the value structure of this painting in such a way that it just feels very well organized. I don't know how else to say it other than that. There's different elements that if you've watched this video series before, you'll see immediately. There's elements of contrast. There's elements of using the different pictorial elements to create like borders between things to keep your eyes from floating off the page. So I did this quick draw over of some of the things it is that I noticed. So for example, on the left and the right, we have these giant flowers that are springing up. And there's different contrasting elements going on here. The one on the left, the actual petals of the flower are darker than the one on the right. So those are two contrasting elements. The one on the left is slightly higher in the image than the one on the right. We can also see that there's a face on the left flower that is looking downwards at our figure. So this directs our eye towards the figure. But both of these act as basically like frames that are keeping our eye from going off of the image to either side, right? Like he's trying to create basically a frame around what does he want you to look at. And what he wants you to look at is our focal point, which is this central figure that we see here that is not in the middle of the image, but is slightly to the side of the image, right? And she seems to be looking down at something. It's not completely clear what it is that she's looking down. Let me turn this layer off. Maybe we can get a clearer idea of that. So, yeah, she might not be looking at anything directly. But we can see that that there's even a contrast here in between her and her very light shapes with the darker shapes, the gradient darker shapes that we see in the cat and in these leaves that are covering her head. So there's a lot of different elements going on here. Notice there's not a lot of straight lines in this image. I mean, actually, there's none. The darkest elements are up here in these clouds that, again, they create like a frame and they keep your eye from going up and off of the page. There's curves all throughout this piece, and all the curves seem to converge and intersect with this central figure. We can see with this line drawing done over it, we can see the different curves and how they point inwards towards the figure, and how it is that they either overlap, such as the pot in the foreground with these different leaves that are overlapping with her and pointing up towards her, right? But also we see it in this background element of these little hills that are converging, right? So we want shapes to kind of converge to one central point. And so you could say, in some ways, you could say that all these curves are horizontal curves that are converging to one vertical curve, which is the figure, right? So you basically have three main shapes that are all curved, which are the two flowers and then the figure. But the figure is the only one that's of lighter value. So yeah, let's zoom back out. Let's turn this stuff off and let's appreciate this piece again. I mean, it's an awesome piece. Like there's such a vibrancy to the color, and I think that a lot of it comes down to like these very simple uses of contrast. You know, he doesn't have to render everything to make it look interesting. So let's look at this other one, and then we'll go ahead and close it out. This one again, we see a lot of interesting use of color going on in this piece. When we zoom in, you know, you would think that how we would draw this tiger is with just a black, right, for the stripes. But it's such a subtle thing, but I think it works so well that he's using these two contrasting colors of orange and blue, and he's using the blue for the stripes of the tiger, or of the lion, whatever. He's using these stripes here. He's using them as a blue, and then he has this orange underneath it. So that contrast works really well. And we can see similar elements of that contrast here. Um, he's got this blue water back here, but then he's using a white line, right? Um, Same thing here in this wolf. He's got these blue lines and and a white body, right? So it's an interesting way to work, and I think that it accounts for a lot of the vibrancy it is that you feel in what it is that he's doing. Is the fact that he's just not really using a black pen. He may be using a black pen for line art there, but you can get my point. Now, if I pull this piece out, if I zoom out a little bit, and again, we look at this in terms of just the compositional elements that are going on. Zoom out a little bit more. And we make this black and white. There's certain compositional elements that I drew over here that we can see that become much more apparent. There's elements such as this koi fish that's in the bottom left that is pointing us back into the piece. There's a general direction that both this rooster and the tiger are pointing. And then there's counterbalances between this monkey that's pointing this way, this wolf, and this hog that are all pointing to the right, this horse that's pointing to the right. But then we have counterbalancing elements such as the ram pointing to the left, the rabbit pointing to the left, the dragon that takes us through the painting and points us back to the left. There's different background elements that are pointing us in opposite directions. You have these light shapes that are up here in the top left that are pointing inwards, and again over here on this other side. So these are all different things it is that you can use to organize your piece. That's going to go ahead and call it for this video. For those that are interested in doing any kind of mentorship or getting like extra tutorials, I included a link to my Patreon in the description box below. You can reach out to me if you'd like to do some one-on-one coaching for looking at your art. I also have some of my own work that you can see in the description box below, including some of my comics and different things along those lines. And you can also check out James Jean's work as well in the description. I've included all of his social media links in the description box as well. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching, and take care.